Climatographs, a how-to video. Climatographs show the climate of a specific place. You can determine what the weather's like where you live by looking out the window or simply stepping outside. Weather refers to temperature and precipitation on a given day. The average of the typical type of weather gathered over several years is called climate. Analyzing climate graphs can be helpful to determine a particular biome, or maybe, let's say on a smaller scale, you can use a climate graph to plan a future vacation to a region you haven't visited before. A climate graph combines two sets of data, average monthly precipitation and average monthly temperature. Both of these data sets are placed onto a single graph called a climatograph, which contains both a bar graph and a line graph. Okay, so let's get started. A quick glance at the title of the graph provides you with a short explanation of what is in your graph. In this video, we will be analyzing climatographs to identify biomes. As you can see, the name of the biome is not provided. This is up to you to determine the identity of the biome. In order to identify what you're looking at, you need to then look at the graph's legend. A graph's legend is frequently found on the right-hand side of the graph or chart. In this legend, it tells us what each symbol represents. For example, we can see that the line graph represents the average monthly temperature and the bar graph represents the average monthly precipitation. Bar and line graphs both have an x and y axis. The x-axis runs horizontally. I like to look at this axis first. As you can see, the x-axis represents the months of a year. Therefore, the letter J in this case must represent January, and the letter F must represent February, and so on. In a climatograph, there is a dual y-axis. The primary y-axis, which is on the left-hand side of the graph, is the precipitation. Notice that precipitation is in centimeters. The secondary y-axis, which is on the right-hand side of the graph, is temperature. Temperature is in Celsius. Now let's start to analyze the data on the climatograph. We need to look at one category at a time. I'm going to look at precipitation first. Looking at the overall trends of precipitation, we can see that there's a lot of rainfall. A little over 30 centimeters of rain in March on average is a lot. See, 30 centimeters, here it is, all the way down to March. That's a ton. Okay, now let's move on to the next category, temperature. Temperature is pretty stable throughout the entire year. We can see that it's roughly 25 degrees Celsius, which translates to about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's rather warm as an overall trend. Looking at the two trends, constantly hot, lots of rainfall, we can safely assume that this biome is the rainforest. All right, let's try another graph. Right away, I can see some major differences, but let's take it one step at a time. First, look at the title. We can see that we are still analyzing an unidentified biome. Then we look at the legend. We see that the line graph represents the temperature and the bar graph represents the precipitation. Now the x-axis is dividing the categories into months. We see that there are 12 months indicating the average data in a given year. Again, there is a dual y-axis. The primary y-axis is on the left-hand side. That is indicating precipitation in centimeters. And the secondary y-axis on the right-hand side is temperature in Celsius. We can start to look at trends. Looking at the first category of precipitation, we see there is very little to no precipitation in a given month. The second category, we see there's extremely high temperatures as an overall trend. The temperature doesn't dip down too much on average. So if we look at both of these trends, high temperatures, little to no precipitation, we can safely assume this biome is the desert. All right. One more for good measure, then it's your turn. First step, look at the title. We're looking at a climatograph for an unidentified biome. Then look at the legend. Line graph is temperature, bar graph is precipitation. On to the x-axis, we see the categories are split into months of the year. Again, there's a dual y-axis. The primary y-axis is precipitation. The secondary y-axis is temperature. Looking at overall trends of precipitation, we see there's a moderate amount of precipitation throughout the year. Remember, precipitation can be either rain, snow, sleet, etc. And then the overall trend for temperature is a little bit different than what we have observed before. We can see that the temperature is rather cold during January and February. Then we notice that the temperature starts to increase until it reaches its peak in June and July. Then we notice the temperature slowly starting to decrease again. Does this remind you of the 4 distinct seasons in our area? So looking at both of these trends, moderate precipitation throughout the year and a fluctuating temperature, we can safely assume this biome is a temperate deciduous forest. Yay! Alright, so now you know how to read a climatograph and you should be an expert at identifying biomes.